Okay, we're on the next tutorial. This one is going to show how to do input, and so we're right exactly where we left off. Multiple ways to do input. I am going to add a button, and that button is going to tell which grid point got hit. And after this we'll go over other ways to do input, but for now let's just do one thing at a time. So similar to adding a view and doing stuff to it, we're going to add a button, so we need a way to point to the button. Add a button. Okay. Now, obviously we have to create the button. Instead of using alloc init, we're going to create a convenience, or use a convenience function called button with type. Button with type returns an auto-released button. And to make it clear, you say UI button type custom. It's the easiest way to create a clear button that I've done. You can alloc init and set the properties. It's going to be a little bit more code. Since this is auto-released, which means it's released as soon as the cycle of rendering and input and everything the system does is over, which only takes a very split second, it gets released. So we obviously need to put it under something and have it retained. Notice how I release v up here? That just reduces the retain count. V is still pointing. As long as the view that it pointed to still exists, it's still pointing to that. So it says, I don't want responsibility for it, but I am still pointing to it. So we can use v, add subview, a button. This essentially puts an invisible button. Unfortunately the button has no frame, but yeah, an invisible button added to v. So we're going to run into a slight problem. So watch this. We need to give it a frame. A button.frame equals v.frame. Button uses something called the target action protocol, which means we can make the button respond to events. All we have to do is tell it what class is going to hold the function and what function to call, and those functions are called methods, or messages, sorry. So let us add the button add target, add a target itself, which is going to be this file. So we'll add a function later. In Objective-C they're called selectors. For control events, touch up inside. Okay. Lots of different things you can do, and I put the semicolon too quick. Okay, there. So selector, what do we want to call it? I have a touched square. As you can see, I actually coded this before. I ran into a slight issue, but it turns out I already knew how to fix it. I just wanted to make sure before sending it off to you guys. That colon means it takes in a variable. So any event from a control can be written 3 different ways. So I could just say touch square, and this would get called. And if you don't need to know what is calling it, you can just say IB action, name a function, call that, do something. But we happen to need to know which one is calling it. So it's going to take in the control that sent it. That's the other way. And if you need to know the exact time and how many touches were there, you'd say with the event, and then UI event, then just give it a name. And that's the full, the longest thing you can type with an IB action. Right now we only need one of these. We don't need to know when, so let's actually delete this and keep the sender. So every button adds a frame, and I said there's a little issue with this. I'll show you in a second. By nslog sender sent a message. So nslog is quick. I can also say sender.background color equals black color, blue color, and just to make it even more obvious. So open up the console. As you can tell, I did this differently earlier, made it run about the same actually, just typed hit a square instead. So I'm clicking it, nothing's happening. But the upper left one, I can click and it sends this message and turns it blue, and I can keep clicking it and sends more messages. So what happened? Well, I told you it relates to the frame. If you read the manuals, you'll notice that all of the coordinates are relative. So you know that this is initially 0, 0 times 100 times 100, so that's 0 and 0, because 0 times 100 is 0. Grid width and grid height divided by 3, of course. So the first upper left frame is 0, 0, 100, 100, and then it just so happens the button frame also matches 0, 0, 100, 100, and 0, 0 is the top left. Alright, to make this make more sense, when you get to the next view, for the frame itself, it's 1 times 100 and 0 times 100, because it's the next x, but y doesn't change for a while. So 100, 0, 100, 100. And that says I'm off to the right, which is fine, we got that working earlier. But then the button frame happens to be the same as the view frame. But remember, the button is a subview of the view, or rather V, so the inner view. So it's actually positioned at 100, 0, 100, 100, but that's relative to its super view. In other words, its super view is this view that was already shifted to the right once, and it gets shifted to the right even more. So now it's just outside of the view that it's supposed to be subviewing. So long story short, you need to make the top left corner of the button 0, 0, and that will match the frame's upper left corner, because it is relative to its super view. Okay. There happens to be a property called bounds, which is always 0, 0, and then the width and height. So I could do that. I want to be a little more illustrative though, so feel free to try that at home. 0, 0. I could say v.frame.size.width and height, but I'm going to take a little shortcut here. Okay. Now will it work? Was the position of the frame the only problem? Yes, apparently it was. Does it look like we have enough to do tic-tac-toe? I'd say we do. The only thing you have to add is logic you might have learned in your C programming class, or if you're like me, you learned on your own and kind of ignored the teacher the whole time. So, and don't get me wrong, I do have a bachelor's degree in information technology. It will teach you a lot about processes, but they can't teach you as much as Andre Lamotte can teach you. And okay, so a lot of what I learned, even this for loop thing, is a trick I learned from Andre Lamotte's book, Windows Game Programming for Dummies, and he writes awesome books. He gives out the hardware stuff now. But yeah, he was an awesome author. Old books tended to teach you everything. The new books tend to kind of teach you what I'm showing you here, but then they don't teach you like the AI and the physics. And there's a nice book. At least I opened it up. The Ranch, one of those Ranch guides, Cocos 2D programming. It appeared to have everything in it. It was nice. So anyway, back to topic. We have this working, as you can see. Sent a message. Very excited message. Change it to color. So what we need to do for tic-tac-toe is figure out whose turn it is and change the color, and then there's a final part where we have to figure out exactly what went where and did somebody win. That's the next video.